it is my honor and privilege to introduce our moderator for today, and that is Alfred Mayer from the Physicians for Social Responsibility in New York. And he is a social activist and co-chairs of the Radiation and Health Committee. He's very active in New York City, and he's networked with PSR and other groups regarding the ongoing nuclear disaster at Fukushima in Japan and the UN response to Fukushima. And additionally, he's the past president and secretary of Friends of Chernobyl Centers in the US, which works with Chernobyl Centers for Psychosocial Rehabilitation in 5 Ukrainian communities greatly affected by the Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe that began on April 26th, 1986. Boy, thank you for that. He has visited the community centers and reactor site in Ukraine. He's been a program director for the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability in Washington, executive director of PSR Wisconsin, and chair of the Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice. Alfred Mayer.
Thank you very much. It's my great honor to moderate this important meeting today. I want to say that we have 259 people taking part at this moment. I will give a brief introduction to each speaker just before they speak. After they speak, we'll take just a moment for 1 or 2 questions of clarification, not of discussion of the issues, but should there be some little thing you need clarified, put that in the chat, and we'll take a moment after each speaker speaks. Then after all 3 speakers have spoken, we will open up the floor to a more general conversation and more in-depth discussion. So please do put your questions in the chat. So the first speaker I'd like to introduce is Dr. Helen Caldicott. She is the world's preeminent anti-nuclear activist who graduated from the University of Adelaide School of Medicine in Australia and later became a faculty member of the Harvard Medical School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In 1971, she played a major role in Australia's opposition to French atmospheric nuclear testing in the South Pacific. In 1974, she founded the Cystic Fibrosis Clinic at Adelaide Children's Hospital. While at Harvard in the early 1980s, she reconstituted and reinvigorated Physicians for Social Responsibility, ultimately leading 23,000 US doctors committed to educating their colleagues, communities, and legislators about the public health dangers of nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and nuclear war. Dr. Caldicott greatly influenced international nuclear disarmament progress by meeting with then President Ronald Reagan at the White House, leading President Reagan to work with Premier Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union to achieve nuclear abolition. These 2 leaders almost achieved nuclear abolition in the 1986 meetings in Reykjavik, Iceland. Dr. Caldicott has invigorated entire generations of anti-nuclear activists starting in the 1980s in the medical profession and the general public. She continues to this day to be a powerful motivator, combining a rigorous scientific medical standard with passionate commitment to public health and species survival. Dr. Caldicott also founded Women's Action for Nuclear Disarmament, WAND, in the 1980s in the US. It's now named Women's Action for New Directions. WAND and PSR remain important players in advocating for public safety and security. The author, Dr. Caldicott is also the author, editor of 8 books, including Nuclear Madness, Missile Envy, and recently Sleepwalking to Armageddon. She has received many awards and honorary degrees and has been the subject of 3 award-winning documentary films. She was named one of the 20th century's most influential women by the Smithsonian Institution. Thank you so very much for joining us today, Dr. Caldicott.
Thank you, Alfred, and thank you for the work you've been doing. I would like my slide to be put up now, please. Yeah, now this is a list of all the radioactive elements made in a nuclear reactor. Unbelievable. This is a CANDU reactor. It's a Canadian heavy water reactor, but the elements are very similar in every reactor. And as we go through, I'm not going to say how long each isotope lasts, but some last seconds, some last hundreds of years, and some last thousands of years. So we're just going to have a look at all of them. It's pretty unbelievable. I don't think people have any idea of what is made in a nuclear power plant. And this happens when uranium atoms split and make all these elements. Just look at them as we go down. And then I'm going to talk about their biological properties and what will happen if 1,000 gallons of radioactive water is tipped into the Hudson River from a biological and medical perspective. Just look at this. It's very important that you understand this and what nuclear reactors actually produce. Someone said they can't see the slide. I hope everyone can. Nearly finished. Down we go. Yes, people can see it. Americium, curium, neptunium, berkelium, californium. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Now, the cooling pool cools spent nuclear fuel rods. That means they're extremely radioactive and they have to be cooled for a long time because they're very hot and they could melt and release radioactive elements into the air, which is what happened at the Fukushima accident and disaster. Holtec, I don't trust. It's got a poor record. I think they're in it for money. They make shortcuts and the like. So I'll just describe some of the elements that will be released into the Hudson River, which is a tidal river from which many, many people receive their drinking water. People fish in the Hudson. Children swim in the Hudson. It's important for you to know that children are 10 to 20 times more sensitive to the effects of radiation than adults. Fetuses, thousands of times more so. So as a doctor and a pediatrician, I'm talking about health effects. And that's the thing that really, really concerns me. So what could be released? Well, first there's cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years. Now, a half-life means that in 30 years, half of the cesium has decayed away, but you multiply a half-life by 10 or 20 to get its total radiological life. So 10, 300 years, 20, 600 years. Now, cesium is a potassium analog, and our muscles are full of potassium, and potassium is a very important element in our body. And what happens if this water is emptied into the Hudson, there's a biological food chain. So the algae suck up these elements hundreds or thousands of times and bioconcentrate them. Then the crustaceans eat the algae, and this is the food chain which goes up, bioconcentrating at each level. So algae, crustaceans, little fish, big fish, us. When you eat a fish containing, say, cesium-137, you can't taste it, you can't smell it, and you can't see it. It's invisible to the senses. And so you eat the fish, the cesium goes into your gut. It gets absorbed because the body thinks it's potassium. It's laid down in muscles and various other cells. Cesium can cause a deadly muscle cancer called sarcomas. in Brookhaven National Labs on Long Island, there was an epidemic of sarcomas amongst young children because of the release of cesium years ago. And cesium will hang around in the environment for 600 years. So that's number one. Number two is strontium-90. I'm only choosing a few elements to give you an idea. Strontium-90 is a calcium analog. And why do we use calcium in the body? For our bones. Cesium has a half-life of 28 years. It's a beta emitter. And so is, strontium-90 is a beta emitter. So is cesium. Beta emitters emit an electron. So if you have strontium-90, small amount of it in your bone, it's constantly shooting out little electrons. And the cells next to the strontium-90 in the bone, every cell has a gene that controls the rate of cell division called the regulatory gene. And if that regulatory gene is mutated or altered by the electron that's shot out by the strontium-90, the cell will sit dormant for any time from 5 to 50 years. And one day it starts dividing in an unregulated fashion, producing millions of cells, and that's a cancer. And as the cancer grows, the cells are very, they migrate and they break through into lymph vessels and into blood vessels, and they spread throughout the body into the brain and the lung and the like, producing secondary cancers. And it's a cancer is a parasite. And you know from seeing people who have cancer, the body just disintegrates and the cancer grows and grows, and eventually the person dies. So strontium-90 causes bone cancer, or osteogenic sarcomas, we call them. Nasty, nasty things. Children, don't forget, are so sensitive to these isotopes and radiation. And then there's plutonium, which is a deadly thing. Atoms were first split, uranium atoms, to make plutonium, because plutonium is a fuel for nuclear weapons. You need 5 kilos to make yourself an atomic bomb. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,400 years. It's an alpha emitter, so it emits 2 protons and 2 neutrons, and it's a big particle that it emits, and it's highly carcinogenic and mutagenic. If you inhale 1/1,000,000th of a gram of plutonium into your lung, you'll get lung cancer. So it's a deadly substance, and it's treated by the body like iron. It combines with the transferrin protein, which is a transporting protein which transports iron all over the body. Therefore, it deposits in the liver, where it can cause liver cancer, in the bone where the red blood cells are made, causing osteogenic sarcoma, multiple myeloma, leukemia. It also, unlike many other elements, crosses the placenta, because the placenta thinks it's iron. Placenta doesn't let anything through, not viruses, anything, to protect the fetus. The fetus is incredibly sensitive to radiation. And around Chernobyl, there are homes full of grossly deformed children, like the babies who were deformed by thalidomide, without hands or anencephaly, babies with no brains, but they don't live. I've delivered such a baby. So plutonium causes severe fetal abnormalities, but it's highly carcinogenic, and it lasts for 500,000 years. Its half-life is 24,400 years. I've just mentioned 3-4 elements in this cooling water, but there are many more. And from that chart you just saw, some elements last seconds, and some last millions of years, and some last thousands of years. We don't know what is in that water. Oh, and the last one to talk about is tritium. Tritium is H3, made of 3 atoms of hydrogen. The nuclear industry is very concerned about tritium, and in fact, in the Journal of Health Physics, there are numerous articles about tritium. You can't remove tritium from water because tritium becomes part of the water, H3O instead of H2O. Tritium gets out into the atmosphere from nuclear power plants, and if you're immersed in a cloud of fog near a nuclear power plant, the tritium in the fog can actually enter the skin. Nothing else gets through the skin, but tritium can. Tritium is a beta emitter, emits an electron. It's highly carcinogenic. Of course, it enters the fetus. There's no way to remove tritium from the water. And then what happened? And of course, we're talking about fish and people eating the fish and the like, people drinking the water. No one can taste, smell, or see the radioactive elements. They're highly medically dangerous. And no way should this water from the cooling ponds, which will be very contaminated or concentrated with radioactive elements, should it be put into the Hudson River. What to do with it? I don't know. You can't evaporate it because it goes into the air and contaminates everything. I think it should be put in huge tanks and taken out, I don't know, to the desert and a huge hole dug and the water put in there. It's a disaster, an absolute disaster waiting to happen. So do not let them put that water into the Hudson River. How do we handle a tritium that's in the spent fuel? Well, if it's in the spent fuel, it stays in the spent fuel. No, it leaks out, of course, into the cooling water. You can't handle it. I mean, once it's made, and it's a deadly carcinogen. That's nuclear power. I mean, that's why doctors are totally opposed. I mean, think how hard we work to try and save a patient with cancer. Usually we don't. Nuclear power plants are carcinogenic factories. That's what they are. They're carcinogenic factories. Period. Right, Alfred?
Yes, well, thank you very much, Dr. Caldicott. We did get one question that would fit in just a brief follow-up. Can you make that list of radionuclides available to the participants from your first slide?
Yeah, well, that's up to you, really. I mean, you've got the slide.
Okay, great. Well, if it's with your permission, we'd like to use it.
Absolutely. It's a very, very important slide.